Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Tonight, the Fed stands strong under pressure.
Higher tariffs have begun to show through more clearly to prices of some goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. Basically, this was quite a good meeting all around the table. We have made no decisions about September. We don't do that in advance.
Fed Chair Jay Powell announcing rates will remain unchanged despite growing dissent within the FOMC. What Powell said after his announcement and the lack of reaction so far from President Trump.
Plus, the massive drop for copper after the White House announced a 50% tariff on semi-finished copper products while stopping short of impacting much of the domestic industry. We'll have more when we speak to Joseph Lavorgna, counselor to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent.
Also tonight, the big tech earnings we received just after the bell from Mag 7 members Microsoft and Meta, what they're reporting, and how the behemoths are competing with the likes of Alphabet and Amazon in the AI race.
And the infighting within the Democratic Party blows up in public view while Republicans unveil their planned congressional map in Texas that could net them 5 additional seats in Congress.
With other states looking to follow suit, we'll discuss that and more when New Hampshire Senator Jeanne Shaheen and Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Ryan Mackenzie join us up ahead.
We've got all that and more for you tonight with our reporters covering every beat. Bloomberg's Laura Davison is with us with the latest from the White House. Michael McKee on set with us covering the Fed. Romaine Bostick in New York reporting on tonight's market movers, and Ed Ludlow from San Francisco giving us the latest on the big tech earnings of the day. But we begin with Laura as the August 1st tariff deadline, Laura, is quickly approaching. We got more news from the White House today, not just on copper, but on souvenirs Americans might want to bring back into the U.S. and India as well, now facing a 25% tariff with the threat of more.
Yes, so this is really the White House sort of warming up for this big August 1 tariff deadline. Trump has said this deadline is going to be the date that these tariffs go into effect. There's a lot of technical questions about how that will happen because shippers are supposed to start collecting those in just a couple days. They don't even have the forms. They don't even know what the tariff rates are on for many, many countries. But one of the things that really sort of shocked markets today is we saw the Brazil tariffs and the copper tariffs being less than expected. There were a lot of exemptions and carve-outs. But a surprise here was this de minimis exemption on tariffs. So these are, small value packages that Americans, ship to themselves from overseas, whether it be wine or packages from Timu, or even what they bring in their suitcase now face a tariff if it's up to $800, which could be a real big, change in airports, causing a lot of havoc with summer travel.
Boy, they're going to be searching bags, it sounds like, at some point. Look, we talked about 90 deals in 90 days. Of course, everyone's heard the refrain. We're actually here now, finally, ahead of the August 1st deadline. Will there be a flurry in the next 24 hours of additional deals, or is this what we've got?
In terms of deals, the one sort of country that's still waiting out there is South Korea. There we may see something specific happening. Trump has then suggested that there would just be some sort of blanket tariff rate. We saw back in April it was a 10% blanket tariff. Yep. He suggested he may want to go higher, perhaps 15 or 20%. But there's only a handful of hours until that goes into effect.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison, we thank you so much. Another busy day at the White House as we get our way toward Friday's deadline as President Trump continues his criticism of the Fed Chair, Jay Powell, who held a news conference today to discuss the FOMC's rate decision.
My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. Despite elevated uncertainty, the economy is in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low, and the labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has been running somewhat above our 2% longer-run objective.
Joining us now for details in today's FOMC meeting, a man who was there, Bloomberg's Michael McKee, who was questioning the Fed chair just a short time ago. Did a pretty good job not making news today, huh?
He did a very good job. He did exactly what he wants. I've said the Fed follows the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. The markets didn't like it because they were hoping for a September rate cut, but basically what the Fed chair was saying is we're going to keep our options open. We are going to get a lot more data, which could enable us to make a decision in September. but it may take longer than people anticipate for any inflationary effects, especially to build themselves into overall numbers that we get. So he's kind of taking a step back from any kind of guidance that they'll do something in September.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when we consider what the Fed wants to do, it was interesting when he was talking about tariffs, he suggested we're going to guarantee essentially that it's just a one-time interest rate or a price hike, because we will use our tools with interest rates to make sure this doesn't turn into persistent inflation. Was that a veiled message to the administration that actually the only thing that's going to keep tariffs from being inflationary is the Fed policy that the administration doesn't like?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a veiled threat. It was a kind of direct threat.
Sure. Okay.
But it's not really a threat. I mean, it's the Fed's job to keep prices stable. And what he was saying is the Fed is going to do its job. If inflation is going up, then we're going to push interest rates higher, which is what you would expect. And the concern, of course, is that with all of the criticism the Fed's gotten from the president and his minions, that people are going to lose faith in the Fed following through. And so he's making it clear that, yes, we will follow through. Base case, he said, which is kind of interesting because he aligned himself with Chris Waller, is that it would be a one-time really jump. But the problem, he admitted, is that we're getting these tariffs in dribs and drabs. We've got some more today, as you were just talking about. More to come on Friday. And if that happens, then it could stretch the process out. And then you get people thinking, oh, yeah, well, next week we're going to have even more inflation. And that's what they worry about.
He was asked about the visit to the Fed building on Friday by President Trump. We were curious what happens to those hard hats. Those are going to be famous at some point.
Well, I know some of the staff got to keep their
Is that true?
hard hats.
Interesting.
But I don't know about the president.
Said he was honored, though, to have Donald Trump come to the building.
Both sides are backing off a little bit. They're talking about being honored to be in each other's company. But I have to wonder, watching on TV here as we're on, the president having a public event. And so far, since the Fed left rates unchanged, Donald Trump has not said a word about the Fed or Jay Powell. And I wonder if he's feeling okay.
Well, the night is still young.
That's
Bloomberg's
true.
Michael McKee, thank you so much. And joining us now for a look at how markets reacted to tariffs, the data, and, of course, the Federal Reserve, we turn now to power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Romaine?
Yeah, and the power move today was actually in the Treasury space. And to Mike's point, the president has been eerily quiet on the rate decision today. But that rate decision was more about the press conference. And you see that reflected in the moves in the 2-year yield. On an intraday basis, at one point, it shot up about 8 to 9 basis points during the press conference as the market started to interpret the commentary from the Fed as being a little bit more hawkish. The idea that maybe, just maybe, we're not going to get as many rate cuts as had been priced into this market as it had prior. You saw that also reflected in the dollar. It was already strong heading into this meeting, but once Jay Powell started talking, it got even stronger. Now on a 5-day run, the longest win streak for the dollar going back to late January, early February. And there on your screen, you take a look at the market pricing. These are the expectations for how many rate cuts we get in 2025. Just a month ago, the market was pricing in as many as 3 rate cuts. Right now, they're pricing in barely 1. And that really is a function of this idea. As Jay Powell pointed out, he's much more concerned about inflation and less concerned right now about what's going on in the labor market, seeing stability there, but more risk on the inflation side.
Of course, we're going to be learning a lot more about the labor market on Friday, Romaine. And when you consider the 2 big events, the jobs report and, of course, the deadline on reciprocal tariffs, what are analysts bracing for here in a market that could go through some gyrations? Or are you going to tell me that this is all priced in?
No, I'm going to tell you, like the girl in that Ortega commercial, why not both, Joe? I mean, there are focus, of course, on that monthly labor market report. That will, of course, be really the guiding light on Friday for this market. But that tariff deadline is important, too. And there we've already seen some rumblings in that space. Of course, today, the president came out and gave clarity on those copper tariffs. And you saw a lot of volatility in that space. Copper futures traded here in New York at one point dropped as much as 20%, largely because the market had actually tried to call the president's bluff. They actually thought he was going to follow through with most of those tariffs, but he's basically rescinded a couple of those and said that they won't apply to finished products. And that is disrupting a big trade that we had in this market, Joe, which was a lot of folks trying to buy a lot of copper ahead of those tariffs. You see those stockpiles on your screen. That's what got built up over the last few weeks that now, in theory, is going to have to be built down because what folks bought, in theory, is now going to be worth a little bit less than what they thought.
Well, I'd like to ask you about another area in which commodities and tariffs might end up intersecting, Romaine, because when we think about the president's announcement today that India is going to face a 25% tariff on its imports or exports to the United States, it was also that they will face a penalty on top of that for purchasing Russian energy. How, knowing that there's that threat of secondary sanctions that could impact the global oil market, are we seeing that show up in oil prices at this point, or does the market kind of call Trump's bluff on that?
I think the market is kind of indecisive on it. You did see some activity when those headlines first came in the oil market with regards to crude futures here in the U.S., but it was relatively modest changes that we're talking about here, Kayleigh. And this gets to the idea is that on that particular topic, no one knows. What we do know, this has been on the bargaining table, not only with India, but of course with China as well. And there are rumors that this apparently was on the table with the EU too.
All right, Romaine, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick live from World Headquarters in New York. We thank you. As we continue with power moves now and a look at tech earnings we received after the bell, a couple of them in particular, as we turn to San Francisco, where we're joined live by Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Tech. Of course, we're looking most closely at Microsoft and Meta. Ed, on the surface here, it looks like they blew the doors off.
Yeah, they really did on every single metric. Meta is really interesting to start with. Its advertising business remains strong, so a beat across the board in the quarter gone, and the outlook for sales in the third quarter above expectations. But the main thing to track is their commitment to spending on AI, right? So what they did was narrow the range on capital expenditures to 66 to 72 billion, basically a raise on the bottom end by 2 billion. But then something surprised us. And in the statement, what the CFO said was that they're expecting on a dollar growth basis to spend even more in 2026. And I think back to when I was in D.C. with you guys last week, the president name-checking Meta in his Winning the AI Race Summit speech on the investment they've made. Well, he'll be pleased to hear that they continue to do so into the next fiscal year, which was something we didn't have on our bingo card.
Well, I'm not sure we had necessarily a 7% plus move to the upside for Microsoft after hours on its earnings on our bingo card either, Ed. What's the driver there?
Yeah, its cloud unit Azure grew beyond expectations, 39% year-on-year growth. The street was looking for 34.2, something like that. The reason we track it so closely is that that's the main measure of whether all their investment in AI and capital expenditures for data center and the other investments they've made is paying off. But we got a metric for the first time on Microsoft, which is worth mentioning momentarily, which is Azure revenue specifically in the fiscal year that has just ended was $75 billion. It's the first time we've ever found out anything about Azure on a dollar basis. So we know it sits behind just behind Amazon AWS in the market for cloud, but it is a signal of the scale that unit has had. And historically, what Microsoft would tell us is that they would have intelligent cloud that basically included Azure and everything else, all their legacy products. Now we have something much more clearly demarcated for AI. And again, Microsoft, one of the companies that the president name-checked last week, that is continuing to commit its capital expenditures to grow infrastructure in this country.
All this AI spending you're talking about, Ed, is going to go to one place more than anywhere else. And I'm looking at shares of NVIDIA after hours crossing the $180 mark. This is all good news for Jensen Huang, isn't it?
Yes, and you and I discussed this at length. Jensen Huang is presently the president's best buddy. And the reality is that in the market for GPUs that go into data centers or AI accelerators, NVIDIA has more than 70% of that market. There were others that were in the audience last week and that will get name-checked, but that's the direct translation. When you have Meta, Microsoft, last week Alphabet say, this is our spending for this fiscal year, this is our commitment for next, the vast majority of that goes to the high-performance GPUs that Jensen Huang and NVIDIA are selling.
Well, of course, Ed, with all of those names you just mentioned, we've gotten a lot of earnings from these companies already. We still have two more to report tomorrow, Apple and Amazon. What will we be watching for?
Yeah, Apple, in one sense, has its end market story in China, where the expectation is it will return to growth in China. It's a really important market where it's been discounting and using promotions to get back a grip hold there. But the broader story around tariffs and supply chain is that Apple is being forced by the policies of the administration to think again on China. So maybe we'll learn a little bit more about that. Last quarter, Apple told us that in this current period, tariffs would have about a $900 million cost for them. But this is a company that will likely report more than $90 billion of revenue. So that might seem small, but it's quantifiable and we'll track it closely. Amazon, I think, is also moving higher in after hours, largely because of what we heard from Microsoft and Meta. This is a strong cloud environment, so we hope that they'll tell us more about their AI prowess, not just the money they're spending, but the revenue growth that's coming as a result of that, specifically tied to AI.
All right, Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech. A big week for you guys. Thank you so much. And coming up, we'll turn to Capitol Hill, where there are two big hurdles standing in the way of the Senate's summer break. We'll discuss when Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire joins us live. But first, we'll continue our conversation on today's Fed decision and Friday's looming tariff deadline with Joe Lavorgna, counselor to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew. We'll be having a lot more on President Trump's response to the Fed chair's decision to leave rates unchanged coming up. But first, some of the other stories we're following in today's Bloomberg Power Brief. A massive earthquake off the coast of Russia Tuesday night triggered a tsunami warning across the Pacific, including Japan, Chile, and the western coast of the United States. 4-foot waves were recorded in Hawaii, with smaller waves hitting coastal areas of California. Warnings have been downgraded in most areas, but some advisories remain in place over aftershock concerns. The magnitude 8.8 earthquake was the strongest recorded since 2011 and will likely end up as one of the top 10 strongest in recorded history.
Whether it's by train, bus, or car, commuting into New York City is going to become more expensive. Today, the city's transportation authority approved a series of increases. That includes a gradual 10% increase for Connecticut residents commuting in on the Metro North Railroad. Tolls to enter the city by car will go up as much as 52 cents. And next year, a subway fare will jump 10 cents to $3 a ride. The city's congestion fee, which raised nearly $335 million in its first 6 months, will not change.
And former Vice President Kamala Harris says she will not run for governor of California next year. The announcement just made ends months of speculation over whether she would seek to return to elected office in her home state following her defeat in the 2024 presidential race. The most recent poll from June found Harris leading the race by 24%, but also found 40% of California voters were still undecided. California's current governor, Democrat Gavin Newsom, will reach his term limit in early 2027.
And now we go back to our top story today. It, of course, was Fed decision day, leaving rates unchanged, with different views from the administration and the FOMC on the economic outlook, as we saw evidenced earlier this afternoon as President Trump and the Fed Chair Jerome Powell discussed the current cost of goods with seemingly very different perspectives on the matter.
Prices are way down. Fuel is down. Groceries are down. Things like eggs are way down. And we have eggs down now to a point where they were actually lower than even before. So I just want everyone to know prices are way down.
Services inflation has continued to ease, while increased tariffs are pushing up prices in some categories of goods. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation could be short-lived, reflecting a one-time shift in the price level. But it is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent.
Joining us now live here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio with more on the administration's perspective on the economy is Joe Lavorgna, counselor to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, also former special assistant to President Trump during the first administration. Joe, welcome back to Balance of Power. We heard from the chair, Jerome Powell, today that he actually might agree with you on something you've told us frequently, which is that tariffs could result in just a one-time increase in prices. But he said what could guarantee that it's only a one-time increase is that the Fed will act to make sure it doesn't result in persistent inflation, using their tool of interest rates, higher interest rates, if necessary. Do rates not need to stay high for the president's policies ultimately to work and not cost the American consumer too much?
No, this is where I think the chair has it wrong, and that is that if there is going to be an effect, and we could debate if there really is much of an effect, maybe some isolated categories. The overall inflation data have generally been weaker than expected for 5 months in a row. But if at some point there is an effect, it's a one-off price level effect. You would not keep interest rates high in an environment where potentially there could be a one-off price level effect. And what troubles me the most is if you look at the Fed's official forecast, they had inflation in March at 2.7, and then in June they revised it up to 3.0. This is the official forecast from March and then in June. Those numbers turned out to be 2.5 and 2.4. So the Fed revised its inflation numbers up, where instead inflation actually tilted downward. Rates are restrictive by historic metrics. If you're looking at where the Fed thinks R-star is, they're restrictive relative to where markets say they are. The yield has been, the Fed funds, the 10-year has been trading below the Fed funds rate for basically 3 years. And the most interest-sensitive parts of the economy, as you know, structures, residential real estate, that's housing, have been soft. So no, I don't agree with the Fed chair on this.
Well, Joe, I appreciate your joining us here on Fed Day. I'm shocked that we haven't heard anything from the president since 2 o'clock here. I don't know if you've had a chance to speak with him, but I know he's been up to some other things. He had an event a short time ago at the White House, but no Truth Social post. I think we know how he feels about the decision. And with that said, I wonder where we are on new candidates for a Fed chair, if anywhere. Is this still a two-horse race?
Oh, that I can't say. I mean, the president, there's a lot of really qualified, competent people that will be under discussion. And this is still, I believe, some time off. So this is nothing that is going to be decided today or tomorrow by any means. The president has expressed his frustration with monetary policy, which is certainly understandable. And then we'll see what happens going forward. But, you know, on the Fed, there is a bigger issue, and that is also the institutional nature of the Fed research staff generally treating inflation as a growth problem. You have fast growth, low unemployment. They perceive that to be inflationary. And that's not the way inflation works. It's always a monetary phenomenon. And President Trump's passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, which increases the supply side of the economy, will produce faster growth and lower inflation, very similar to what we had in the first term. And I think too many people on the Fed, and arguably the Fed chair as well, have this view of inflation that just has been proven wrong time and time again.
Joe, given that you do counsel the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who we expected was going to be briefing President Trump about the negotiations he just completed with China in Stockholm yesterday, have you gotten a readout from Bessent as to whether or not President Trump is going to sign off on an extension of the current truce beyond August 12th, and for how long?
Secretary Bessent said that the Stockholm trip built off the improvement in London, which built off of the improvement in Geneva. There's been really good progress. It's the president's decision. There's still a lot of time between now and August 12th, so we'll see what happens.
I want to ask you about the job market, Joe. We've got, obviously, the jobs report coming up on Friday, but the longer view remains a question with the president's immigration purge across the country. If the tariffs take hold and we actually start to see reshoring, foreign direct investment here, as you have been touting, as you've been planning, where's the labor pool to fill these new jobs going to come from?
Well, there is still a significant amount of discouraged worker. We still have low participation rates, especially with seniors, which is why the reduction on taxes for seniors uplift participation rates. Certainly for teenagers, we can lift participation rates there. As the below market wage rates are no longer in force, that should lift nominal wage rates significantly, which will encourage people to come back into the workforce and generate a lot of the real meaningful employment opportunities which are there. Moreover, Joe, if you look at how the One Big Beautiful Bill is structured, it's designed to increase capital outlays. Those capital outlays then can even be used with the existing workforce to produce more with less. So you get faster growth and low inflation. Again, very similar to what we saw in the first term.
Glad to have you back, Joe. Don't be a stranger. Joe Lavorgna, counselor to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. We thank you, as always, for being with us on Bloomberg. Coming up, we're going to turn our attention to the latest from Capitol Hill, when Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire and Republican Congressman Mackenzie of Pennsylvania join us. August recess about to take hold for the Senate. House lawmakers are already there, and in some cases getting an earful from constituents. We're going to talk about this with both of them as we look ahead to the budgeting process this fall. Coming up next on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The Democratic Party needs a wake-up call. And what are the very people here elected to defend the Constitution of the United States, saying, oh, well, today, let's look the other way and pass some resources that won't go to Connecticut, that won't go to Illinois, that won't go to New York, that will go to the states he likes. That is complicity with an authoritarian leader who is trashing our Constitution. It's time for Democrats to have a backbone. It's time for us to fight. It's time for us to draw lines.
High drama on the Senate floor. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kayleigh Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. That was Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey yesterday on the Senate floor, where there were some very heated exchanges among Democrats, specific to the party's approach to the Trump administration and the Republican majority on the Hill. Joining us now with her perspective, live from Capitol Hill, is Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, ranking member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you. When you get off the air here, you're going to march to the Senate floor yourself with a group of Democratic senators to sound the alarm on tariffs and ask lawmakers to unanimously pass a piece of legislation with your name on it that says tariffs cannot be authorized under IEPA, the International Emergency Powers Act. Right. Will a single Republican vote for this?
I doubt it. I went to the floor several months ago with the same unanimous consent request for legislation that I've introduced, and the Republican majority objected to that. But I think it's important to continue to raise the concern, because every business I visit in New Hampshire has expressed concern about the tariffs. I was at a company on last week in Dover, New Hampshire, and they were talking about the concern. They do a lot of business with the EU and talking about the impact of the tariffs on them. I talked to a pharmaceutical company this week who was also expressing concern about the tariffs increasing the cost of prescription drugs, which are too high already. So the other thing that I've heard from literally every business that I visited is that as much of a problem as the high tariffs are and the increases in cost, it's the uncertainty that it means for their business, because they don't know what the president's going to do. He's made about 100 contravening statements on tariffs since he took office. And so businesses don't know how to invest. They don't know how to plan. And that creates real problems for businesses and the people who work there.
Well, but when you are having these conversations with these businesses, Senator, are they telling you that they are looking at more onshoring in the United States, trying to reorient their supply chains domestically, that they have an ability to do that? Because the president says that's what he's trying to achieve.
Well, I was at a company in Rochester, New Hampshire several months ago, a shoe company, and they do distribution of shoes. They bring in shoes from other countries and send them out to retail outlets throughout the United States. And one of the things he pointed out, he had been in business making shoes in the 70s and 80s, and he said, we're never going to see the shoe industry come back in the United States with manufacturing. And so that's a wasted effort. So let's focus on areas where we think we have real opportunities, and those are in areas where the United States innovates and develops new technology in AI and all kinds of other technological innovations. And I think there are opportunities, but they're not going to happen overnight. I think we do need to work on supply chains. I've talked to a lot of companies, particularly in the defense industry, because I serve on the Armed Services Committee, where supply chains are a real issue. We just had a hearing in Foreign Relations today on critical minerals in Africa and the fact that we're not producing those critical minerals in the United States that we need for the auto industry, for our appliances, and virtually everything we do. So we need to do that, but these tariffs are not going to help us with those critical minerals. We need to make some of those investments, and we need to have a strategy for how to do that.
Senator, I want to ask you, by way of your Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees, about a story that involves our Secretary of Defense. Pete Hegseth's team is denouncing the Pentagon's internal investigation, the Inspector General probe into the whole Signalgate affair, calling the inquiry a political witch hunt leaked to the news media by Biden administration holdovers. I don't know if you know what is inside this report, if you've been hearing from the IG on this, but if wrongdoing is found, what will be the recourse for the Secretary of Defense?
I don't know what's in the report. I haven't seen it. But what I have heard is that the classified information that was shared over that signal chat from one of our generals in the Middle East was listed as classified at the time it was then taken and put on the signal chat and shared. So again, I think we need to look at the report. It's very important that we have independent inspectors general who can make independent and objective assessments of where there might be inappropriate behavior. And I think clearly this is one example of that. And it's not just been on one occasion that Secretary Hegseth has shared what appears to be classified information, but it seems like it's been more than one occasion.
Senator, if we could return to the subject of tariffs in an area in which tariffs and geopolitics might again intersect. The president said yesterday that 10 days from yesterday, so 9 days from now, he would be implementing secondary tariffs or secondary sanctions. His language often changes on Russian energy that is purchased by other countries if Russia does not reach a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, shortening what was originally a 50-day deadline. Do you support that move, though largely you obviously are unsupportive of the rest of the president's tariffs?
Well, I see that as sanctions, not tariffs, and it's sanctions, secondary sanctions on countries that are buying oil that we have said we want to limit because of what Russia's doing with the money. The money from that oil is funding their war machine for this unprovoked illegal war in Ukraine. So I do support the president on this. I think we should have passed
and will they work?
Graham-Blumenthal bill months ago to put in place secondary sanctions on those countries that are buying that Russian oil, China and Brazil and India, because they are keeping this war going in ways that are killing people daily.
But do you believe, Senator, that these particular sanctions will change Vladimir Putin's behavior in a way previous sanctions have not?
I think secondary sanctions that would shut down his ability to bring money into the country to fund his war machine through oil would influence his behavior if we pass it strongly. And right now there are more than 80 sponsors in the Senate for the Graham-Blumenthal legislation to put in place those secondary sanctions. And if we implement it in a way that ensures that we stay on top of it and go after those countries that are buying that oil that we've sanctioned.
All right, Senator, we appreciate you joining us. Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire. Thank you so much. And joining us now with more from across the aisle is Republican Congressman Ryan Mackenzie of Pennsylvania, who's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, among others. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's good to have you while you're out on recess back in your district talking with constituents, I'm sure trying to sell them, I would imagine, on the one big beautiful bill that you and your colleagues just passed before leaving town. What are you hearing from them about concerns they may have, aside from whatever benefits you may want to tout, about how it could negatively impact them at home?
Yeah, so we just had a roundtable this morning with folks from the energy and manufacturing sector here in Pennsylvania. They were very excited about the direct positive benefits of one big beautiful bill in the tax space, things like direct expensing, immediate expensing of R&D and capital investments. At the same time, we did hear concerns about the overall regulatory burden that still exists in terms of permitting and new regulations that had been put in place over the last couple of years, and how that is being an impediment to growth. So that was definitely a concern. And then I heard a little bit more of a nuanced conversation, I guess, than the senator has heard from her constituents around tariffs. Some feel that they're very positive in terms of leveling the playing field, and others say, well, we can't get this product here in the U.S. Is there a way to have an exemption or a carve out? And that's something that our office has done, reaching out on behalf of local businesses that have expressed that concern to USTR. And they are actually incorporating that feedback into some of these trade deals, especially ones like the EU, where we saw some help and relief for manufacturing components that would be coming into the U.S.
I'm curious to hear. Yeah, I'd love to hear some examples of that feedback, Congressman. That is, I guess, the way things are supposed to work with constituent services. But you represent Allentown in your district. I've got Billy Joel playing in my head today, of course, once the steel capital of the world. With the tariff deadline looming on Friday, do your constituents believe that steel manufacturing is coming back to Allentown?
So I think we still do have remnants of Bethlehem Steel here, places like Lehigh Valley Heavy Forge that do some of that work in the defense industry. Obviously, that was a big blow when Bethlehem Steel went out of business, 20, 30 years ago at this point. But now Allentown and the greater Lehigh Valley is a very vibrant, diversified economy with all kinds of manufacturing in the medical device space and consumer goods and other things. So really a strong manufacturing base that still exists here, but now very diversified. So steel and manufacturing in that kind of space is only one component, but they are looking for that kind of support and relief because for many years they were targeted by China with dumping of products into the market that was absolutely killing the industry. And anybody in that space will tell you that the relief that they got previously is the only thing that really kept them alive to this point. Obviously, we need to be doing more to keep them in a position where they can continue to provide.
Well, obviously, that industry is important for the economy in your district, Congressman. I believe we're having some connection issues. But here in Washington, D.C., where I and Joe Matthew are, the federal government is important for this economy. And I wonder what the congressman is going to tell us if we can reestablish that connection, Joe, about how the federal government may or may not be operational post September 30th, or at least fully funded, because once he gets back from recess, there's going to be an appropriations battle that is underway with no clear idea as to how it will be resolved, with Democrats and Republicans very split on
Less than a month to play with.
Yeah.
When you factor in long weekends, it gets a little more complicated here. And as we discussed last evening with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who went to the floor to make the point that she made right here on the air, that Democrats in many cases feel burned and may not take part in the budgeting process when they come back from recess, assuming that the congressman does find his way back. Maybe we'll get an enhancement in the broadband in Allentown. Coming up, Texas Republicans unveiling their proposed congressional map could get them 5 additional seats. Plus, reaction to Kamala Harris's decision on the California governor's race. We'll discuss that with our political panel coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Consumer spending is up, business investment is way up, domestic manufacturing is way up, real disposable family income is up, and personal savings are up. Other than that, we're not doing so great. We have the hottest country, and I'll tell you, it's a great, we're having a lot of fun with it.
President Trump just moments ago holding an event at the White House with leaders of the tech and healthcare industries, taking a victory lap on the new GDP figures out today. And joining us now here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio for more is this evening's political panel. Jim Kessler, Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Ashley Davis, partner at S3 Group. Welcome to you both. As we just heard the president talk about all of the things that are up, one thing that is not is his approval rating, even in the face of what, at least on the headline, looks like strong economic data. It feels a little bit like a throwback to the Biden administration. Jim, is President Trump having just as much difficulty getting credit for the economy as his predecessor did?
I was watching that segment. I was like, is that Joe Biden? He looks like he aged 5 years, too. Yeah, people aren't feeling good. Joe Biden had spectacular numbers throughout his presidency, the economic numbers, but people aren't feeling good. And things are still very expensive out there. And this has been a great economy for a long time if you're in the investor class, if you're in the professional class. But for everybody else, it's not, and they're not satisfied. So nice numbers, President Trump, they're not translating.
So Trumponomics and Bidenomics have something big in common here, it sounds like. Better than expected GDP report on the quarter this morning. The smart people at Bloomberg Economics, though, say look at the first half of the year, and it does show a slowdown from last year. When you add the weight of tariffs, you could have a president looking at very different numbers by the end of this year. Politically speaking, what would that mean as you gear up for midterms?
Well, absolutely. But I also think that we've been talking about the hypothetical tariff problems for a long time. And listen, I don't know if the markets are really moving on these little tariffs anymore. I think the next big one that we have to look at is India. And maybe Canada, just from like a PR perspective, more than anything, more than an economic growth. But I agree with you 100%. I mean, the fact that the markets are so good, the fact that all these numbers are very positive, the fact that the everyday American is maybe not seeing it yet is going to be his problem moving forward. So, I remember the days under Bush of, mission accomplished. So I want to be, you're laughing, so I know you remember that. So I do want to make sure that we are in a good place, that the everyday American is feeling good. Because right now, they're still not.
Well, and as we've said, that has been a problem for successive administrations now. And one member of the previous administration, Kamala Harris, actually made her way back into the news today. Jim announcing that despite all of the speculation, she is not going to run for governor of her home state of California. Is that I think I'm done with public service, or is that I'm holding my cards until 2028?
Sounds like I'm holding my cards till 2028. And if she did run for president, on the one hand, she would be the front runner in the Democratic primary right away.
You think so?
Oh, yes. I mean, Democrats have rarely ever not chosen a vice president when they run for the primary. At the same time, when you've lost once and you try to run again, the Democratic primary voters have been very unkind historically. So she's a front runner in one sense, and she's the caboose in another sense. So I think this is getting interesting.
And Ashley Davis says, go ahead, make
my
day.
No. I actually think that she would have had a great platform in California because she would have had the Olympics. She could have rolled back some regulation or some taxes and be a winner in regards to what Newsom has done. So I actually think that I'm actually surprised, but who knows? I mean,
with that job as the end game, we're on the way to
on the way to the president. Yeah, no, I think she could have been governor, made these changes, and then run, as a platform. Because right now she still has the Biden issues that are hanging around. But listen, there's Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. I'm a Pennsylvania girl. I think he's a really good governor. I mean, I think there's going to be other candidates that will come out. And by the way, as we were talking about in the green room, we have no idea who's going to run on the Republican side, and can anyone hold together the coalition that the president has ever been able to do. I mean, he's the only one that's been able to do that. And so, can JD do it? Can others do it? It's yet to be seen.
Yeah. Obviously, we're a long, long way from 2028. Yeah. We're not quite so far away from 2026. And as we consider what the midterms may actually bring, we also need to consider that the map for the midterms may look different if Texas successfully is able to rig the map or make some changes to create the 5 new seats that President Trump would like to see in that red state. We spoke about this earlier this week on Balance of Power with Texas State Representative James Tallarico about the redistricting that is being taken up in this special legislative session. And this is what he told us.
The president has asked our governor, Greg Abbott, to find him 5 more congressional seats. He wants to redraw the political maps in the middle of the decade to try to protect his majority in the next election, regardless of how we all vote. And I think this is politics at its worst. Politicians picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. And so I'm doing everything I possibly can to stop this gerrymander from going through, to stop this power grab.
Ashley, are Republicans opening a dangerous box with this one?
So I need to take a broader look on this because I lived through it so much in Pennsylvania when there was a Democrat governor 7, 8 years ago now. This is the problem. I mean, this is why we don't have any moderate Democrats or Republicans anymore. Obviously, this is a little bit different happening in the, halfway through what it normally should. But I just don't like 100% how they're just making these districts so red or so blue. By the way, Jeffries, and you'll agree with me, he's now, and he's trying to find extra California seats. He's trying to find extra seats in, various states that are more Democrat. But this isn't what the country should do because there's not going to be good policy that comes out of it.
Well, it looks like Gavin Newsom is ready for that fight. Will California be the state to follow Texas if this happens?
It's possible. Now, California has a commission that picks the districts.
That's right. They have to change their constitution.
Yes. But I've heard that some commissioners are saying, well, if Texas starts doing this, maybe we as a commissioner, maybe
How about
we should
that?
change things as well. And I just think this is the sort of thing where it's like the tit for tat. So the Democrats are going to react and do something, which means the Republicans are going to react and do something, which means the Democrats, and it spirals out of control. It's bad all around. And Ashley is right. Like, we need more competitive districts, not more gerrymandered districts. That would be great for the country. It's bad for politicians, great for the country. But yeah, this is a bad thing that's happening in Texas.
Well, and what James Tallarico told us when I asked him, well, is it a mistake then for Democrats to counter? He was like, yeah, but I also understand the need to fight back. I feel like that's the issue the Democratic Party is having right now. How to fight back when? How to do so strategically? What's the answer to that, Jim?
Right. And we saw that play out on the Senate floor with Cory Booker and Amy Klobuchar and Catherine Cortez Masto there. And, you know, the thing is like, do you fight back by swinging at every pitch that's out there, or do you wait for the pitch that you feel like you can make good contact on? And I think I don't think the issue with Democrats is how hard we should fight. It's just how strategic should we fight? But that is playing out, and yes, that is dividing the Democratic Party, at least in Washington.
Somehow we have not mentioned Jeffrey Epstein because he keeps coming up every day, even when the president travels, yes, Ashley, to Scotland. Last night on his way home from Scotland, the president offered more detail on his past relationship and fallout with the convicted sex offender. Here he is with Bloomberg's Skylar Woodhouse. Watch and listen.
People were taken out of the spa, hired by him. And then when I heard about it, I told him, I said, listen, we don't want you taking our people, whether it was spa or not spa.
Mr. President, did one of those stolen, persons, that include Virginia Jeffrey?
I don't know. I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people. Yeah. He stole her.
Virginia Guffrey, he was just talking about there, one of the most prominent victims from the Epstein case. In several lawsuits, she testified Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell recruited her from Mar-a-Lago as a teen, which followed several years of sexual exploitation. She died by suicide in April. It is a horrifying story that the president was talking about at the back of the plane. Ashley, does this continue coming up? We're 4 weeks now. Does this go through the end of the summer till lawmakers return?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the first story, Joe, that we have not been able, we meaning Republicans, have not been able to get past, because you have very prominent Republicans in the House and Senate that also want to bring this up as an issue. The problem is, in my mind, is the distrust of what people have in our government, whether it's Republicans, Democrats. We were talking about Chuck Schumer, we were talking about Mitch McConnell. People just don't trust our government. And this is another reason why. And until there's something that comes out, it's going to continue to. And the spa conversation's probably hard.
It's a tough one. Your former boss, Chuck Schumer, is leaning into this. He wants the files released.
Yeah, look. So first of all, thank you, Donald Trump, for bringing it up on Air Force One and putting more fuel to the fire on this story. Look, it's clear that Donald Trump had a closer relationship with Jeffrey Epstein than what was advertised, and that's what's coming out, and it's making news.
Well, we're going to continue following this story with the help of Ashley Davis and Jim Kessler. A great panel. Many thanks to both of you for the insights on balance of power. And check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.